All right, good evening, MNC. This is a quick Christmas edition of whatever we're going to call this, Dave's Corner. Just a little drum and bass track tonight, but wanted to show some new plugins or some new techniques I've been just applying to this. But let's have a quick listen. So yeah. Big track for very few actual individual instruments that's going on in here. Trying to make things sound quite fat from the outset, and sort of borrowing some techniques from everyone, to be honest, in terms of doing that. And it actually all started with this rather odd cowbell sound. And for the modular synth enthusiasts amongst you all, this is actually based on a Reactor Blocks synth, which I have built from scratch. I was just playing around. There are some new free block add-ins from a company called Toybox, which you can check out. And so I just literally threw something together by chance more than anything. I started off with this cowbell module, which produces a cowbell, and that I then sort of pushed into a saturator, which then goes into a reverb, and then just out to the main out. This then wavetable add-in was just again purely by chance. Threw it in, bit of an accident, put the output into the filter of the saturator, and it gave it a sort of comb-like filtering sort of effect. So now that cowbell sound sort of gets crushed, it gets slightly distorted, saturated, and it gets kind of comb filtered through this sort of crazy link here into the reverb, puts a nice little tail on it, and we're able to change the pitch, kind of not necessarily kind of accurately by semitone, but by the pitch of the keyboard. It does then change the tuning of that cowbell, so it's not quite a one-for-one sort of semitone mapping, but it works and solves a problem. So that's how it all started. It started with that cowbell sound, added it into obviously a pattern here, and the rest sort of followed from that. So really then just started to add some drums. Drums came from just a number of just built-in Cubase samples, actually, from the library that comes with it. I haven't yet moved my full sample libraries over from my old PC because it's going to take too long over the Wi-Fi, so I need to find a way to do that, but that's by the by. So just going to the drums on their own. So to make these sort of somewhat fatter, as I say, sort of borrowing some of the techniques from you chaps, first of all, using the Transient Master plugin from Native Instruments, just to kind of push the initial punch of both the snare and the kick, but also take some of the tail off by sort of changing this sustain control here. So if I just solo this snare on its own, and then take this off, you can hear it gets much more punchy in terms of the actual sound of the snare coming through. But the other thing I've added is this texture plugin. So this is adding something completely different and actually some extra noise and sort of top end onto the snare sample itself. So let me just play it without. So sort of regular snare sound, and then with. So you can hear this sort of higher pitched sound on top, and it's actually this shaker plastic that is named here. So you get a choice of a huge number of different sounds, and you can even import your own samples. And what it's essentially doing is triggering that sample when it hears a sound come in, and you can control when it applies it based on this gate control, and then you can also limit the top end, so at what point it's going to sort of cut off. You can then also fade it in and out. You've got a dry wet here in terms of the mix. You can apply it based on a filter to that actual sound. So I've taken all the bottom end out of that shaker control, and you've also got an envelope control here. You can also EQ separately the texture element as well as the underlying sample, so in this case the snare sample, and then the texture on top. So I've kind of like got them, you know, working in conjunction with one another, and that adds this real sort of sparkle and crunch on top of the snare, which is, and it just helps fill it out really in terms of the dynamics. So that's on the snare. It is also the transient master, sorry, is on the kick, but I've also added it onto the sorry, not the hi-hat, but this shaker pattern as well. So again, if we just solo the shaker and then let's play it without texture, and then with, and then this time I've actually layered a hi-hat on top, and sort of pitched it up. It's just changes the sort of the pitch and the sound, doesn't it? So I mean, it's just creating something a bit fatter and interesting to work with. As you would expect, then all the individual drum sounds are being pushed into a group track, and the only thing I've done on here is just actually added the stock Cubase compressor to actually make things, it actually kind of give it some life. So without, it's this, then with, and that's really down to the release being sort of semi in time with the track, to give it sort of that in and out sort of pumping quality. So that is drums. We've talked about the cowbell, so I kind of got as far as that, got the drums, and we had this sort of slightly annoying sound. So obviously we needed to add some bass and sort of try and match that pattern. So roughly found out the key that the cowbell had sort of settled into, used a serum patch, actually one of the presets, but I've done some adjusting based on the filter and actually changing some of the wavetable positions to change how this sounds, but this is it on its own. Yeah, so I've kind of added a filter change based on this envelope here when the note's triggered, and as I say, I've changed some of the wavetable and unison effect on this, and actually added a sub that goes direct out, i.e. it doesn't go through any of the filters, any of the processing, so it's a clean sub signal that sits underneath, which out without having to add a completely separate instance or other synth into the mix. So that was my bass pattern. I kind of copied it to use as with another sound, and we happened to, for a pad in this case, I actually ended up playing something different in that was roughly sort of a similar pattern, but it just sounded different and gave a bit of variation over the top. Now this went back to one of my old favourites. So I'm using Contact's modular icons. That's one of the libraries that you get as part of Complete. But the addition is, if we look at the actual plugin settings, yeah, Guitar Rig, which I think I've been using since version 1, back with Ed in the Naked Electric days, now up to version 6, in fact 6.1 was released only this week. It did come with some new additions, and I've picked this jittery octave setting that's under the pads group. So it is designed to go over pads, and so if I take this off, and you'll hear the pad on its own, let me just solo it. Not particularly interesting, but with this, it makes a huge difference. Yeah, so loving that little transpose stretch, the way it sort of grains it out and sort of cuts it all at the same time. Like, brilliant stuff, and sort of much more effective and probably sounds much better than just adding a single plugin like this on the top. And the other thing though, just added, I don't know, I think a couple of you, I did send this out, Fresh Air. It's a freebie from Slate Digital. It sort of just adds some nice ambience like around the sound, so it kind of like lifts it a bit of just dynamics into it, both at the mid-range and the high end. And then lastly, for the cheating sidechain effect, the Waves Pumper is a really simple way of just doing that sidechain effect without actually having an input, and so it just makes that pad sort of just gently wobble over the top of the loop. So that is all my parts. So yeah, drums, we have a pad, we have a bass, as I say, using some new things, some accidental things, and some other techniques that I know that all you guys are using anyway, but just wanted to share some of that with you this evening. And yeah, here it is. All right, thanks all.